biofriendliness. MDMA releases a potent cocktail of oxytocin, serotonin and dopamine into the synapses. There's no technical reason why this profile can't be replicated indefinitely, shorn of MDMA is neurotoxicity. Do we really want to drug each other up from an early age? Moreover, life would clearly be safer if our fellow humans weren't genetically predisposed to unfriendly behaviour in the first instance. But how can this friendly predisposition be guaranteed? Friendliness can't realistically be hand-coded by tweaking the connections and weight strengths of our neural networks, nor can robust, full-spectrum biological intelligence be captured by a bunch of explicit logical rules and smarter algorithms, as in the paradigm of symbolic AI. Perhaps mass oxytocination, amplified trust hormone might work if negative feedback control of oxytocin release can be circumvented, yet enriched oxytocin function leaves one vulnerable to exploitation by the unenhanced. Can we really envisage a cross-cultural global consensus for mass medication? In addition, enriched oxytocin function can indirectly even promote greater unfriendliness to outgroups in consequence of promoting in-group bonding. So as well as oxytocin enrichment, we need a more inclusive, intellectually sophisticated conception of us that embraces all sentient beings, hence the need for full-spectrum superintelligence. Perhaps biofriendliness, mirror neuron synesthesia. Another long-term solution might be collectively engineering ourselves with mirror neuron synesthesia, or its functional generalization. On seeing you cut and hurt yourself, a mirror neuron synesthete feels as sad with pain as acutely as you do. Because mirror neuron synesthesia is a hyper-empathizing condition that makes unfriendliness in effect biologically impossible and enriches our capacity to represent each other's first-person perspectives. However, this so-called disorder is rare today. The biggest problem with all these proposals and other theoretical biological solutions to human unfriendliness is that billions of human and non-human animals would have been killed and abused before they ever come to pass. The religious believers and traditionally minded bioconservatives won't want enhancement, remediation, either for themselves or their children. So messy efforts at political compromise are probably unavoidable for a very long time to come. Billions of sentient beings will suffer and die in consequence. Another question. Does full-spectrum superintelligence entail benevolence? The godlike perspective-taking capacity of a full spectrum of superintelligence doesn't entail distinctively human friendliness any more than a godlike superintelligence could promote distinctively Aryan friendliness. Indeed, it's unclear how benevolent superintelligence would want humans in their current guise to walk the earth. But is there any connection at all between benevolence and intelligence? Pre-reflectively, benevolence and intelligence are orthogonal concepts. There's nothing obviously incoherent about a malevolent God or a malevolent, or at least a callously indifferent superintelligence. As a skeptic may argue that there is no link whatsoever between benevolence, in the face of it a mere personality variable, and logical reasoning power. After all, some sociopaths score highly on our autistic mind-blind IQ tests. So sociopaths know that their victims suffer, they just don't care. However, what's critical, I think, is a criterion of representational adequacy. Representation is not an all-or-nothing phenomenon. There's a zombie super Asperger running symbolic AI program, may be beneficent or maleficent. It can't know or care. Most starkly, it could be programmed to convert the world into utilitarian or helium, as one might call it, without any understanding of the implications of what it will do. This is a risk of creating super Aspergers. By contrast, full-spectrum superintelligence does care in virtue of its full-spectrum representational capacities. For practically today, a superior analogue of mirror neurone synesthesia is feasible with reciprocal neuroscanning technology, some kind of naturalized telepathy. The problem here, as advocates of radical honesty soon discover, is that many Darwinian thoughts scarcely promote friendliness. They are unfriendly, unedifying, and quite unsuitable for public consumption. Thus, unless perpetually loved up on MDMA or its equivalent, most of us would find a regime of mutual mind reading traumatic. Society and those personal relationships would collapse. Either way, our human incapacity fully to grasp in every respect other sentient beings' point of view isn't just a moral failing, it's a cognitive limitation, failure to grasp an objective feature of the world. Fortunately, it's a cognitive failing amenable to technical fixes. The biological singularity. Yet does this positive feedback loop amount to a singularity in anything more than a metaphorical sense? Metaphorically, the biointelligence explosion represents an event arising beyond which humans cannot model or understand the future. Events beyond the biosingularity will be stranger than science fiction, too weird for unenhanced human minds, or the algorithms of a zombie super Asperger to predict or understand. In the popular sense of event horizon, yes, the term is apt, though the metaphor is potentially misleading. Thus, theoretical physics tells us that one can pass through the event horizon and say supermassive black hole and not notice any subjective change, even though one's signals would now be inaccessible to an external observer. The biosingularity will be inconceivably different. Question. This is quite central. What is full spectrum superintelligence? Quotation. G is ostensibly some innate scalar brain force. However, ability is a folk concept and not amenable to scientific analysis. That's John Marks, Department of Anthropology, University of Nature. Another quotation, William James. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the flimsiest of screens, there are potential forms of consciousness entirely different. Yes, intelligence is a folk concept. It's not well defined, or rather any attempt to do so amounts to a stipulative definition that doesn't carve nature at the joints. The cattle horn Carroll psychometric theory of human cognitive abilities is probably most popular in academia, but the Howard Gardner multiple intelligences model, for example, differentiates intelligence into various spatial, linguistic, bodily, kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalistic, and existential intelligence, rather than a single general ability, G. Who's right? As it stands, G is just a statistical artifact of our IQ tests. If intelligence were indeed akin to an innate scalar brain force, as some advocates of G seem to believe, or if intelligence can best be modelled by the paradigm of symbolic AI, then the exponential growth of digital computer processing power might indeed entail exponential growth in intelligence too. Other facets of intelligence, however, resist enhancement by mere acceleration of processing. One constraint is that a theory of general intelligence should be race, species, and culture neutral. It should embrace all possible state spaces of consciousness, pre-human, human, transhuman, and post-human. The list of criteria below doesn't pretend to be anything other than provisional. Full spectrum superintelligence entails, though, first, the capacity to solve the binding problem and run real-time, data-driven world simulations of the mind-independent world. Yes, if you're a naive realist about perception, this isn't a problem. In some sense, our five senses disclose to us the world which we apprehend directly, but this has got all the advantages of effect over honest toil. Most of our mind brains over hundreds of millions of years of evolution have been dedicated to running data-driven simulations of the mind-independent world, or at least so I would argue direct realists about perception would disagree. And one of the greatest challenges for the mind-brain is how is it possible for all the multiple features of the hundreds of objects, for instance, that you are now apparently directly perceiving, features that are apparently directly encoded and being processed in different parts of your mind-brain. How is it possible for them to come together in particular bound objects? And in addition to this, how is it possible for all these objects to be combined apparently more or less seamlessly into a unitary experiential field? How on earth is one going to technically solve this problem? And one way to get a handle on at least some aspects of the binding problem is to consider cases of people with a neurological disorder whose capacity for binding even partially fails. One example would be someone with simultanagnosia who can literally only see one object at once. Imagine how cognitively incapacitating that is. Or perhaps someone with cerebral akinetopsia or motion blindness who cannot see or apprehend motion. It's just like individual frames of a film. These examples could be multiplied. I'm not going to, at least not now, unless anyone is interested, give my particular solution to the binding problem and how mind-brains manage to put it off, but it is a major intellectual challenge, which is why our current silicon robots, for instance, can't match the prowess of a bumblebee. And I would claim that this ability to run real-time, mind-independent, heliocentric simulations of the mind-independent world is absolutely critical to intelligence. So that's one feature. Even I suppose, superintelligence will need somehow to be able to represent and simulate in more or less real time what is going on external to itself. So, intelligence entails a self or some non-arbitrary functional equivalent to which intelligence can be ascribed. Compare here perhaps multiple personality disorder or florid schizophrenia or indeed your PC. In the absence of a unitary self, there is no entity that is intelligent, just an aggregate of algorithms. And this is actually tied into the binding problem, I think, described for the first criterion. Third criterion for any full spectrum superintelligence, capacity for mind reading, perspective taking capacity, higher order intentionality, social cognition. The intellectual success of the most cognitively successful species on the planet rests not just on our recursive syntax, but also unsurpassed mind reading prowess. This is the Machiavellian ape hypothesis. Any ecologically valid intelligence test of a social animal species must incorporate social cognition. Fourth criterion for spectrum superintelligence, a capacity to distinguish the important from the trivial. Now this isn't obvious, but that's essential, I think. Our theory of significance should be explicit rather than implicit, as in contemporary IQ tests. What distinguishes, say, calendrical prodigies and other idiot savant syndromes from, say, Grigori Perelman, who proved the Poincaré conjecture. Very severely social dysfunction done. Fifth criterion, full spectrum superintelligence will entail a capacity to navigate multiple state spaces of consciousness. Dreaming states, lucid dreaming, waking consciousness, echolocatory prowess, visual prowess, introspection, the different realms of psychedelia, salvia space, K-hole, including, this is the important point, including realms of experience not yet co-opted by either natural selection or post-human design, but tracking features of the mind-independent world. And the final criterion, autistic pattern-matching rule-following intelligence, the standard mind-blind cognitive toolkit scored by existing IQ tests. So yes, devising any kind of ecologically valid intelligence test that can reliably, predictably and economically discriminate between life forms is immensely challenging, not least because the test will express the value judgments and species and culture-bound conceptual scheme of the tester. Full-spectrum superintelligence is certainly harder to quantify scientific than mathematical puzzle-solving ability or performance in verbal memory tests. IQ. But to misquote Robert McNamara, we need to stop making what is measurable important and find ways to make the important measurable. An idealized full-spectrum superintelligence aspires to an impartial view from nowhere, or God's eye view of the multiverse, a mathematically complete theory of everything, as does modern science. But in virtue of its God's eye view, full-spectrum superintelligence will also be supersentient, able to understand all possible first-person perspectives, the state space of all possible conscious minds in other Hubble volumes, other branches of the universal wave function, and in other solar systems or galaxies if such beings exist within our cosmological horizon. Idealizing, full-spectrum superintelligence will be able to understand and weigh the significance of all possible modes of experience, irrespective of whether they have hitherto been recruited for information signaling purposes. The latter is, I think, by far the biggest intellectual challenge to face as cognitive agents. Their navigation calls for a methodological and ontological revolution. Consumerists are fond of hyperbole about level 5 shock, etc., but it's been said that if Elvis Presley were to land in a flying saucer on the White House lawn, it is nothing in strangeness compared to your first BMT trip. By comparison, the standard spacefaring of sci-fi yarns admits to little more than rearranging the deck chairs. Ignoring the elephant. For the pachyderm in the room, in most discussions of superintelligence is consciousness, not just human reflective self-awareness, the whole gamut of experience, from symphonies to sunsets, agony to ecstasy. All one ever knows, except by inference, is the contents of one's own conscious mind. Yet according to the ontology of our best theory of the world, namely natural science, conscious mind shouldn't exist at all, i.e. we should be zombies. Dutch computer scientist, not pronouncing his name correctly, famously remarked, or not so famously as I can pronounce his name, the question of whether a computer can think is no more interesting than the question of whether a submarine can swim. Yet the question whether a digital computer can think about qualia can't be dismissed so lightly. Qualia is just the fancy philosopher's term of art for our subjective experiences. Some people are suspicious of qualia because they imagine, and then it seems to do, for instance, that this is some kind of hypothesis, some kind of exotic entity where we're conjuring up out of nowhere. Whereas qualia is just the particular subjective experiences you are having now, whether pains or tickles, to this strange Englishman with a particular tone of voice waggling his hand apparently 3 or 4 meters in front of your body image, but still, I would say, internal to your visual cortex. Sorry for that little detour. I was just qualia, though it's not a weird term to philosophers, sometimes you'll get a blank scare if you lapse into this kind of jargon. Anyway, the question of whether a digital computer can think about qualia can't be dismissed so lightly. If advanced artificial intelligence is to be smart enough to understand and predict the behavior of advanced natural intelligence, AI must understand how biological computers think, talk about, and manipulate their own manifold varieties of consciousness. There is no evidence that serial digital computers have the capacity to do anything of the kind. It's not even all dark inside. Even if very boldly one conjectures that the fundamental stuff of the world, the mysterious fire in the equations is fields of microcrater or something like this, such structures, aggregates of mind dust aren't the same as a unitary phenomenal subject of experience. Perhaps the greatest cognitive challenge of the millennium and beyond is deciphering and systematically manipulating the neural correlates of consciousness. We use this expression in default of any deeper explanation of our myriad qualia. How and why does stimulating via microelectrodes one cluster of nerve cells yield the experience of phenomenal colour, stimulating another superficially similar nerve cell induces a musical jingle, another with a slightly different gene expression profile, a sense of everything being hysterically funny, another of your mother, and another of, say, an archangel in front of your body image. In each case, the molecular variation of neuronal cell architecture is trivial. The difference in subjective experience is profound. On a mind-brain identity theory, such experiential states are an intrinsic property of some configurations of matter and energy. Microelectrodes, dreams, and drugs elicit these experiences regardless of any information signaling role they typically play in an awake mind brain. Orthodox materialism and information-based ontologies alike not merely lack any explanation of why consciousness and our countless varieties of qualia exist, they lack any story of how our qualia could have the causal efficacy to allow us to allude to their existence. Thus, mapping the neural correlates of consciousness is not amenable to formal computational methods. Symbolic AI zombies lack any qualia, or at least any bound macro qualia that could be mapped. Just a note here for any computer scientists. This claim for the cognitive primacy of sentience isn't a denial of the Turing thesis, i.e. that given infinite time and memory, any Turing universal system can simulate any conceivable process that can be digitized. Very fancifully, if the multiverse were being run on a cosmic hypercomputer, speeding up its notional execution 1 million times would presumably speed us up 1 million times too. But that's not the issue here. Rather, the claim is that symbolic AI and on serial digital computers cannot tackle the truly hard and momentous cognitive challenge of first-person states, or understand why some first-person states, e.g. agony or bliss, are intrinsically important. Why does anything matter? At least in common usage, intelligence refers to an agent's ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments. What we call greater than human super intelligence presumably involves the design of qualitatively new kinds of intelligence never seen before. Hence the growth of artificial intelligence and symbolic AI, together with, allegedly, brain-inspired connectionist architectures and soon artificial quantum computers. But sentient biological robots are currently making greater cognitive progress than formal AI. We're doing this by synthesizing psychoactive designer drugs, experimentally opening up the possibility of radically new kinds of intelligence in different state spaces of consciousness. For the most cognitively challenging environments don't lie in the stars, but our own organic mind brains. The baffling subjective properties of, I would say, quantum coherent states of matter and energy. This is a theory that people will disagree how it's possible. But the point I would make is that most of these subjective states that potentially exist aren't yet explicitly represented in our existing conceptual scheme. Case study: visual intelligence versus echolocatory intelligence. What is it like to be a super-intelligent bat? Consider the state space of organisms whose dominant sense mode and egocentric virtual worlds are based on echolocation. This example isn't mere science fiction. Unless post-Everett quantum mechanics is false, we're forced to assume that Google's and quasi-classical branches of the universal wave function satisfy this condition. Indeed, their imperceptible interference effects must be present even in our world. Strictly speaking, interference effects from other branches that have decohered or split, as it's popularly called, never wholly disappear, they just become vanishingly small. Anyhow, let's assume these echolocatory superminds have evolved opposable thumbs, a rich generative syntax, and advanced science and technology. How are we to understand or measure this kind of superintelligence? Rigging ourselves up with artificial biosonar apparatus, transducing incoming data into the familiar textures of sight or sound might seem a start, but to understand the conceptual world of echolocatory superminds, we need to equip ourselves with neurons and neural networks equivalent to smart chiropterans, perhaps. If one subscribes to a coarse-grained functionalism about consciousness, then echolocatory experience would somehow emerge at some abstract computational level of description. The implementation details or meatware of our mind brains, dismissively called, are supposedly incidental or irrelevant. However, the microfunctionalist reckons that the different intracellular properties of neurons, with their different gene expression profiles, diverse primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, amino acid chain folding, etc., are critical to the many and varied phenomenal properties such echolocatory neurons express. We'll only ever know by self-experimentation.
Dave, do you want to wrap things up soon?
Yep. Let's skip. We can stop anytime.
If you had any summary conclusions or anything?
Yeah, it's probably best if people ask any questions, any things they want to
Yeah, question. In the beginning, you were talking about the status quo bias, and that could be very interesting in this context. Could you develop it a little more, maybe?
Yes, I mean, a lot of people, their gut reaction to the idea of phasing out suffering is not carefully weighing the pros and cons, considering the technology. It's simply, no, this is crazy. This is true of considering phasing out human suffering. It's true with even greater strength when it comes to phasing out non-human animal suffering. However, one way one can disentangle the effects of mere status quo bias is to ask someone, well, hey, if you now could press a button or do something similar to create a type-identical copy of our world with all its joys, but equally Auschwitz and all the horrors of suicidal despair, would you actually create such a world? Most people at least would at least give the question some serious thought. It's not transparently obvious that life is so good that one would really create another type identity world. Another way of considering status quo bias is just asking what would we do if we were to stumble across an alien civilization that had indeed phased out the biology of suffering in both humans and redesigned their ecosystem so it didn't exist in non-human animals. Let's assume that their lives are animated by gradients of intelligent bliss. Would we try to persuade them to reintroduce pain and suffering in their lives? And they would regard us as pretty psychotic, and frankly, I think we would be psychotic. So in a nutshell, yes, that's status quo bias as I see it.
Some argue that that there are no any experience that we perceive as pleasurable or nice is only pleasurable in comparison with other experiences. Removing suffering would in effect remove the value that we ascribe to conditions that are not suffering. And that, so to speak, if you remove suffering, you also remove value from the world. What would you say to that approach?
I would ask you just to consider tragically the cases today of people who endure chronic physical and or depression. All of their lives in some cases are spent below hedonic zero. Some of their days may be not so terrible as others, but nonetheless even their days that aren't so terrible can still be quite dreadful. Is one to claim that because they're not having this contrast between enjoyable experiences that somehow they're not really suffering on these not so terrible days? I mean, sadly, this isn't the case. Suffering is endemic to their lives. Conversely, though probably more rarely, there are people today with what's known as hypothymia who are just essentially cheerful, naturally cheerful all their lives. Essentially all their lives are spent above hedonic zero. They're not clinically manic, this kind of out of control syndrome of behavioural excitement, though perhaps only half of cases of mania are actually euphoric mania. But hypothymic people, I've known one or two, perhaps you have too, are essentially, they spend their whole lives above hedonic zero. And what essentially we need to do, at its most bioconservative, I would say, is to